Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be re-reviewing Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I don't actually have a whole lot of nostalgia, at all, for the Super Nintendo. So, a game like this would of course have been huge for the audience at the time. Me, well, I jumped straight to the Nintendo 64. And I didn't even know this was a Super Nintendo game at first because my best friend showed me the Game Boy Advance port, which had a really weird name, like Super Mario Advance 3, Super Mario World. Okay, whatever you want to say. And so, as a result, I didn't fully appreciate the brilliance of how far this game helped the series go, while at the same time also being a little bit spoiled by certain things that may have been mind-blowing at the time, but in retrospect I'm just like, okay, that was a bizarre decision. Thankfully, unlike with most Super Nintendo games, I actually still think Super Mario World holds up really well. And I think a lot of people would be remiss if they looked this off as, oh, just another old Mario game that's unfair. So, for starters, let's talk about why it's called Super Mario World as opposed to just Super Mario Bros. 4. It wasn't because this was a Super Nintendo launch title and they needed a cool name, because whenever there's a cool new name, Nintendo has to name it after their hardware, like they did with Super Mario 64. It's because instead of having a whole bunch of world maps, like in Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World introduced the concept of an interconnected map, where one level would lead to another, and you could go from one part of the map to another. Now, this isn't as involved as you might be imagining. This was before open world games were invented after all, so it was a fairly limited concept. But it was the building block for that genre to come. And so a lot of people would have a lot of fun in Super Mario World trying to find all the hidden exits and find the keys that would allow you to get to another level that you couldn't get to by just going from point A to point B. And usually these secret exits required a huge amount of extra skill that just beating the games in regular order just doesn't allow. In other words, the game makes you feel rewarded for being a Mario master, while at the same time not forcing you to do it if you don't want to. Most of the time. Once you get to the Forest of Illusion and beyond, you're expected to really go out of your way to take a fine-toothed comb over the levels and try to find these secret exits, which I guess you could say maybe I made a mistake in my original script because I said this wasn't explained at all, but I forgot this game also offers hint blocks, so maybe I was told somewhere, but I feel like I did hit all the hint blocks, and I still had to have my best friend come over and say, oh, Paul, you gotta find the secret exit. I'm like, why am I doing that? That's weird. So, Super Mario World is essentially a much prettier version of Super Mario Bros. 3, with significantly better level design, in my humble opinion, less power-ups, but more fun as a result. You've got the standard mushroom, fire flower, and star, which allow Mario to grow bigger, which allows him to do a spin dash to break through blocks, the fire flower, which allows him to shoot fireballs, which can defeat pretty much any enemy in one hit, and the star, which allows him to be invincible. These power-ups work pretty much exactly the same way that they do in the previous Mario games, which is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Mario veterans are like, oh cool, the glory of the familiar. We don't need to deal with a whole bunch of newfound technical mumbo-jumbo. The problem is that they work too similar to the original, and they force Mario to shrink down to small Mario, even if you have a powered-up fire flower or a cape. In other words, the mushroom is 100% pointless. You don't have any reason to pick it up when you could just pick up a fire flower or the cape. I will get to the cape in a minute. So, why is the mushroom even in the game at all? Is it just because that's one of the staple icons of the Mario franchise? Is it because the original game wanted a sense of progression and this game just wanted to feed into the nostalgia craze? It's even weirder of an omission because you could argue, well, Paul, the concept of power-ups was practically invented in Mario. But this game has an item reserve slot. So, At the top of the screen, you can see that maybe you picked up a duplicate of an item, or if you're already in a powered up state, you still picked up a power up. That will go into the slot on the top of the screen, which would cause an item to drop from the top if Mario took a hit, or you could press the select button to do it manually, like if you were in a level that required you to strategically select. So therefore, sometimes you could have a fire flower in reserve and then get a mushroom, and then the mushroom will take the place of the fire flower. Why? What practical advantage does that have? Okay, it's the 90s. They didn't think games all the way through back then, but you'd think they would have at least thought about that much. That's a central power up to the whole series. Anyway, nitpicky gripes aside, the new additions are the cape and Yoshi. The cape is super cool because it feels like a natural evolution to the Tanuki suit and doesn't feel as overly Japanese as the previous reference did. The cape lets you, swipe at enemies by pressing the dash button, but it also allows you to float through the air to make platforming a bit easier. And if you get enough speed by holding the run button, then Mario can zoom up into the air, and then if you move the control pad left and right, Mario can sort of hover through the air of sorts. It's really hard to explain when you don't have footage, but when you actually see it in action, it's a mind-blowing sight. I'm really glad that this cape wasn't just completely ignored in the Mario era, as Ray the Flying Squirrel basically is the cape, but his whole body in Sonic Mania Plus. And the cape was also brought back in the Super Mario World style of the Super Mario Maker games, which is really appreciated. Then there's Yoshi, who is a brand new character that was so beloved in this game that he actually got his own series just a couple of years later. And a lot of people actually forget that it's a sub-series of the Mario series. Basically, you grab onto Yoshi, and he's not only a whole power-up, but you get to ride on him like he's a horse, and even punch him in the... gently pet him on his open eyeballs that don't seem to have eyelids to prompt him to go. Does that actually work? Like, if you have a pet dinosaur, can you tell me if that's how you get a dinosaur to stick out its tongue? Because I'm pretty sure you have to, I'm pretty sure they have to eat on their own. Video game logic, don't even try to understand it in this game. Anyway, Yoshi can eat things with his tongue. Sometimes he just, swallows them, but occasionally he'll be able to hold an item in his mouth and then spit it out for later uses, such as if you swallow a power switch, or if Yoshi swallows a Koopa shell, then later he can spit out different types of abilities depending on the color of the shell. If it's red, he spits fire. If it's blue, he can fly as long as the shell is in his mouth. And if it's yellow, well, I never actually tried that, so someone will have to let me know in the comments section what that's like. He also allows Mario to take one hit, with the caveat being that he'll run around like crazy on the stage, even committing suicide in his despair, unless Mario quickly jumps back on his back. And in case you thought that the animal cruelty couldn't get any worse, sometimes you have to jump off of Yoshi to get to the secret exits that Mario wouldn't otherwise be able to jump high enough to reach. So, yay for having a pet! I guess Super Mario World deserves a How Not to Treat Your Favorite Animal award in a Mario game. Then again, you're jumping on Koopas and talking mushrooms and trying to defeat an evil turtle obsessed with a human princess. Yeah, I've given up trying to make sense of the Mario world by now. It's just too darn weird. So, overall, your objective is to get to the goalpost at the end of each level, and then you eventually beat one of Bowser's kids as a mini-boss in between the levels. These fights are actually really cool. They make good use of the Super Nintendo's Motion Mode 7, which basically allowed for 3D background rotations to give the illusion of being in the third dimension. And they were both challenging and fair at the same time, although personally I think they leaned a lot more towards the challenge side, but that's just me, because I didn't play this game growing up. And the final fight with Bowser, well, it's definitely been topped, in my opinion. This has aged remarkably well and was a pretty genius fight for its time. Overall, I feel like Super Mario World is the first Mario game that truly feels like a grand adventure. Instead of just going from point A to point B, you literally feel like you're traversing mountains and traveling the ocean. I mean, at one point you even have to, well, I better not spoil it in case you haven't gotten that far. But it feels like you could easily make fan fiction out of the way the world is designed and how the backgrounds progressively get darker and more thematically appropriate. So I guess you could say it earns its title of Super Mario World pretty well. Maybe Super Mario Continent would be more appropriate, but I guess that's also not as marketable, so we'll go with World for now. Overall, I give Super Mario World my highest recommendation. While there are certainly parts of it that could probably have aged better, such as some of the hit detections, how Mario loses his power ups, and maybe the concept of secret exits could have been more easily explained, but otherwise it holds up surprisingly well. The music is nice, the controls are great. Ending credits theme is a bit too MIDI for my tastes, but what could they do back in the 90s? And I think that games like this are what makes the more modern interpretations really interesting, because a lot of these ideas were used in later Mario games, and I felt like I was giving a walking history lesson to my sister when I was like, remember this from New Super Mario Brothers? Well, it actually first showed up here. That was a really cool experience. And also, when I see the style in Super Mario Maker and realize we're getting brand new levels in the 21st century based on a 20th century game. How amazing is that? Now, normally I'm not one to recommend games just because historically they proved a lot, but nowadays they've aged poorly. Super Mario World happens to mix the fine balance of both. While it's not my favorite 2D Mario, that honor would probably have to go to something like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, just because it balances out the challenge versus fairness aspect a lot better than this game does. But upon closer reflection, I might have to say this is a close second. So with that, I think you should absolutely download it if you have the chance. The price is dirt cheap if you get it on Nintendo Switch Online. It comes with a bunch of other SNES games. And if you get it on the Wii U Virtual Console, it's also really dirt cheap. So you're not missing much. With that, thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, critiques, something I missed, I'm running out of things to say in these outros, let me know in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and if someone can tell me real world logic on how the Mario universe works, I would love to hear it.